Hello everyone, I'm Linda Besant, one of OBT's Performance Perspective speakers, and the grandma when OBT performs George Balanchine's The Nutcracker. But as you know, we won't be able to do those performances this year. OBT has created an entirely new season to make the most of this opportunity. I urge you to go to obt.org and explore all these innovative ideas. Meanwhile, I've been able to bake up a new tidbit of dance history just for you. Please enjoy. In episode 2, we will explore the evolution of the tutu, the vision that springs spontaneously to mind whenever people think of ballet, and the heart's desire of so many little girls. If one of these girls were to Google tutu, she would read that the tutu made its first appearance in 1832 in La Sylphide at the Paris Opera Ballet. But this early tutu did not spring spontaneously from the costume designer's imagination. Classical ballet costuming for both female and male dancers evolved through 3 eras of dance history in a bubbling stew of fashion and advancing dance technique, flavored by political and economic revolution. We already saw in Ballet Grandma's Episode 1 that ballet began among royalty in the courts of Europe, where courtly fashion for men and women was an imposing and explicit display of rank and wealth, as we see here with Queen Elizabeth's gown, elaborately adorned with a cape, collar, and bouffant sleeves. The lavish hoop skirt is supported by a device called a farthingale. Can you see how the bodice and farthingale foreshadow the tutu? Dance remained a courtly art for nearly 2 centuries, with fashions shifting again and again, as they always do among those conscious of status, until we arrive at that pivotal moment in ballet history when Louis XIV established the Royal Academy of Dance. Gradually, dance technique progressed beyond the capability of amateurs at court, and dance became a theatrical profession. Costuming mirrored fashion at court, and gesture incorporated courtly etiquette. Here we see royal privilege personified in this stylized shepherd's costume from the 1700s. And isn't it interesting how the wired skirt of this shepherd's tonnelet resembles a tutu? In the give and take between fashion and the requirements of advancing dance technique, female performers like Marie Camargot began to shorten their skirts, revealing their feet and ankles. What, demanded the fascinated, even outraged public, did these dancers wear beneath their skirts? Tights? Bloomers? But fashionable ladies quickly followed suit. Camargot's rival, Marie Sallet, defied the prevalent formality in costuming, dancing in works like Pygmalion in simple muslin, draped like a Greek tunic. The newspapers praised Sallet for daring to appear without a panniered skirt, without a corset, and even without any ornaments on her head. Sallet's wardrobe rebellion prefigured a movement in the arts that arose in reaction to the ornate formality of what we now term the Baroque period, neoclassicism, which looked back to the values and aesthetics of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Neoclassicism was but one current in this extraordinary period of social, economic, and cultural upheaval that would rock Europe throughout the latter half of the 18th and early 19th centuries. The theater arts were profoundly rattled. The privilege they expressed was all but swept aside for a time by the French Revolution. La Fille Malgardée, with its story of common people, premiered 1 week before the storming of the Bastille. With regard to fashion and ballet costuming in this tumultuous half-century of political upheaval, The Napoleonic Empire was pivotal. Napoleon's penchant for neoclassicism made way for the Greek-influenced empire style. Can you see how this freed the female body from the restraints of the past? The corset was cast off in favor of a soft, high waist. The breasts were sometimes freed altogether, and fine muslin or silk skirts in long, soft lines welcomed free movement of the legs. The empire style appeared simultaneously in ballet costuming. It was quite a change. The magnitude of change was parodied in this contemporaneous caricature. Too much and too little. With the defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo in 1814, France was restored to a constitutional monarchy. Conservative formality was briefly re-established in fashion and the arts, commingling the old and the new in gowns with long, heavy skirts and empire waists, both in society and as costume. And yet another current of cultural change is imminent. We see it in this masterpiece of neoclassical sculpture. With its mythical subject matter and clean lines, still so expressive of deep emotion, it foreshadows the artistic movement that rose to supplant neoclassicism in the 1800s. Romanticism, an era of delight in nature and bucolic settings as escape from the bleak cities of the Industrial Revolution. An era of fascination with the supernatural and a heartfelt yearning for an unattainable feminine ideal. This aesthetic was perfectly expressed in 1822 by painter Eugène Lamy, who, lo and behold, 10 years later, designed the costume for La Sylphide, the costume we now refer to as the romantic tutu. What a brilliant synthesis of historical elements, abandoning the empire waist and hearkening back a half-century to the corseted bodice. Keeping the light and airy skirt, giving it a slight bell like the ball gowns of old, but without a hoop. Shortening the skirt to mid-calf for freedom of movement and evocative viewing. Alas, this meant the tyranny of tight lacing was back, as these advertisements show. Notice that this is Marie Taglioni, ballet's star ascendant because of La Sylphide in 1832, advertising in a popular magazine of ladies' fashion. Choreographers proceed to settle into an artistic structure that we now refer to as Romantic Era Ballet. These works usually begin in a realistic village setting, with the tutu reflecting stylized traditional folk costumes. These are story ballets, and the plot almost always leads to a supernatural second act, featuring sylphides or willies or naiads, unattainable spirits of femininity, their tutus glowing white in a midnight setting. These second acts became known as Ballet Blanc, or white acts, and survived beyond the Romantic era. Think of the snow scene in The Nutcracker, or Act 2 of Swan Lake. Though the costume we now call the Romantic era tutu was requisite by the mid-1800s, the first written record of the word tutu doesn't appear until 1881. The origin is uncertain, perhaps from cuckoo, French baby talk for bottom. At any rate, the gradual shortening of the skirt was to some extent scandalous throughout history. As early as the 1750s, when skirts began to rise, dancers had to cover their lower parts with pants of precaution. As a bit of an aside, what a debt the dancers of today owe to this French circus acrobat of the Romantic era who invented the leotard. Throughout the mid-1800s, France was continually in political turmoil. deposing monarchy for good in 1848. For ballet and all the theatrical arts, the loss of royal sponsorship was devastating, a topic worthy of exploration on its own. By the time of the Franco-Prussian War and the Paris Commune, conditions in France were dire, as we see with the lives of these artists who created Coppelia in 1870, the last great ballet of the Romantic era. Both died soon after from the privations of war. Seeking work and opportunity, dancers and choreographers from all over Europe turned to Russia, where the Romanov dynasty was still in power. Empress Anna had sought to establish the art of ballet in Russia in 1738 and engaged Jean-Baptiste Landais to launch an imperial ballet school. For the next 160 years, a succession of European ballet masters came to St. Petersburg to teach, develop an imperial company, and create ballets. And the premier ballerinas of the era came to perform with them. The last of these was Marius Petipa, who came to Russia in 1847 and became premier ballet master in 1871. His unrivaled imagination led to a golden age for the art of ballet, and his works define its classical era. Watch, as the years go by, how the tutu rises under the technical demands of Petipa's choreography and the desire to see the ballerina's legs and admire her artistry. Here the tutu begins to sneak above the knee and soon rises higher for both the soloist and the corps de ballet. By 1890, the tutu has reached its apex, perfected by centuries of interwoven artistic, social, and political transformation. Petipa and his assistant ballet master continued to create classical masterpieces. Featuring ballerinas in tutus, the costume now deeply ingrained as an idealized symbol of beauty, majesty, and strength. But what of costuming for the male dancer? Once the absurdities of aristocratic exaggeration disappeared, nothing much changed. The tonnelé that maintained modesty by covering the groin was expressive of the character portrayed, while the legs remained in tights to accentuate well-muscled calves. Until Nijinsky's costume for Afternoon of a Faun in 1912, which eliminated the tonnelé, leaving only a belt of vine leaves, precipitating the gradual demise of the tonnelé altogether, and liberating male dancers to perform classical ballets in tunics and tights. Today we see white acts performed in romantic length tutus, and classical era works with the corps de ballet in romantic tutus and the principals in the shorter classical style. The tutu continues to evolve in currents of culture and fashion as one of the most evocative and provocative garments in history. And in this era of non-binary gender expression, this iconic garment is available to any dancer who wishes to harness its power. For those of you who would like to know what it takes to construct a tutu, check out this blog posted by stitcher Kim Dawson, as she created tutus for OBT's production of Yuri Posakov's Raymonda in 2008. And finally, if you are a fashionista ballet fan, this is the book for you. Much of the information and several of the illustrations in this talk come from this book. Thanks to OBT's music director and conductor, Neil DuPont, who gave it to me as a Secret Santa gift in 2006. We hope you've enjoyed The Rise of the Tutu. Please stay in touch with all of OBT's efforts to share, inspire, and connect. Until we meet again.